It's December already. How many of you have been listening to Christmas music before Thanksgiving? How many? Oh, you got a few? Oh, man, yeah. It just seems like it comes quicker and quicker every year, and it's here, and it seems like such a busy time of the year and complicated, and, there's parties you got to go to. There's parties you want to go to. There's parties you don't want to go to, but you need to go to, and, there's the stuff, if you got kids, there's all the kids stuff, and if you got families, there's the family stuff, and deciding where you're going and what you're doing and all those kinds of things. And I was thinking about it this week that it seems that I think what Kofi had talked about earlier, that the older I get, it just seems like Christmas gets more and more complicated. When I was single, I'd, go that morning to my folks' house, have some breakfast, open some gifts, have a great meal, lay around for a little bit, and then go home and just hang out. And, then you start dating somebody, and you got to figure out where you're going and whose house you're going to. And then if you get married, then it becomes really a big thing about where you're going for Christmas, where do you go for Thanksgiving, where do you go for all this kind of stuff. And you add kids into that, it makes it more complicated. And, if somebody gets a divorce in your family, that you got to figure out whose house you're going to, and is everybody going to be there? Does that mean, dad's girlfriend's going to be there? Does that mean mom's new husband's going to be there? Is your sister's new boyfriend going to be there? Is that loser she's been dating too long going to be there? I mean, it just sort of, people bring people you don't want to over to your house when you have Thanksgiving, Christmas, and it just seems like Christmas can be so complicated, especially when you get all the family stuff as part of it. And sometimes I think it's easy to forget. If you've been around church at all growing up, kind of the religious thing, sometimes we buy into the whole idea of the nativity scene. How many of you grew up with a nativity scene came out at Christmas around your house? That pretty little spot, maybe it's ceramic, maybe it's wood, maybe it's a shiny color, maybe it's something else, but the whole little scene there, and you have the cows, and you have the sheep, and you have the shepherds, and you have the wise men, and you have Joseph and Mary, and of course you have the baby Jesus, and it all looks just so nice. But the problem with that picture is that is not a true picture. That scene never happened in real life. All those people were never together at the same place at the same time. But we want to make the whole story come together. And sometimes it's easy to forget with that sort of sanitized, Christmassy feel that while our Christmases today can seem complicated and even messy at times, that's how Christmas was that very first Christmas. It was complicated and messy. And so today we're kicking off a brand new message series called Christmas, the backstory, because there's a whole lot of backstories to the whole Christmas thing. And it is a really messy story. And I probably should have put a little advertisement out before we got to today. This is probably going to be a PG-13 kind of event over the next few weeks, because that's how the story is. And so we're looking at Bible stuff today, but you just need to know the Bible has lots. That's why I tell you all the time, you ought to read your Bible, because it's got some crazy stuff in there. And we're going to discover some crazy stuff right in the middle of the Christmas story today that I'm hoping will remind all of us that no matter what our complicated, messy Christmas scene looks like this year or has looked like in past years, there still is hope. There's still a message that comes through all that. And there's still a chance to know that God is at work in spite of who you come from, even who you have been. So let's pray together, and then we're going to jump right in the story, all right? Lord, it's that time of the year when we stop, and a lot of people stop to think about you. Maybe just for a moment, maybe something in one of the songs they hear as they're out shopping or as they're driving. It's a chance just for people to again think for a moment about you. And in this space, we're here, the vast majority of us, because we want to give you more than a moment. But some of us are here for the first time. Some of us are here because somebody invited us. Some of us are here because, he's cute. Some of us are here because we're hoping that maybe this Christmas will be something different for us. But in our complicated lives, in our messy lives, I just ask again today that you'd remind us that you are always there with us. That you literally are always in the midst of anything and everything that we face, anything and everything that's ever happened and ever will happen to us. That none of us in this room and none of us watching online has gone too far, has done too much, has too much of a bad story for it not to become a good story. And so I just ask you to use this time as we look back, that maybe we see something of ourselves in it. In your name, amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over in Matthew chapter 1. If you have an outline, and you notice you got in your program and your bulletin and you came in today, you notice it says Mark. That's our first Christmas today. It's actually Matthew, so you can pick a big line in your outline and write Matthew in there, because if you go to Mark, you will not find the story, all right? And I don't want you to call me later and say, Mike, that was the wrong text, because I'm telling you right now, it's the wrong text, all right? But here it is, Matthew chapter 1, and here's how Matthew begins the whole book, this letter that he writes, this story of Jesus. This is the family history. That is the record of the ancestors of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Matthew right starts said, this is the story. This is where Jesus came from. This is it. And for a Jewish person who Matthew is writing the story for, a Jewish audience, he's telling them genealogies are important. Who you came from, your lines were important. Because you could not be certain things if you were from certain families. And if you were from certain families, you were going to be certain things, whether you wanted to or not. And so genealogy is where you came from, the whole line, and to prove some things is important. And so he begins it this way. He says he came from the family of David, and David came from the family of Abraham. He starts with David. For a Jewish person, David is it. And they knew that the Messiah, the hope, had to come from David. And so he starts with David, even though Abraham was older, became many generations before David, he starts with David. And if you've ever read the Christmas story, you have read this chapter before, if you have, and you have skipped over most of it. This is if you have been around church a long time and remember the King James Version, this was one of the begat sections. That so-and-so begat so-and-so, 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 and half the names, some of the names you know, some are familiar from the Bible, some are, I have no idea who these are, some are the same name as somebody's familiar, but they're not that familiar person, and it's a section that's easy to blow over, but I think there's an intentional reason that Matthew starts off telling the story of Jesus by telling us where he came from. And so here's where he came from. Starts with Abraham. He says, Abraham was the father of, that is begot, Isaac. And Isaac was the father of Jacob. He goes back in history and begins to unfold this. And Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah. Their mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Abinadab. Aminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon or Salmon, depending on which way you want to pronounce it. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz's mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed's mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon. Solomon's mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. And I actually stopped there because there's about 9 more verses that go on with who came from who, came from who, came from who. To find it that when Matthew finishes this, to get into Jesus, he says that Jacob was the father of Joseph, and Jacob and Joseph are not any of the Jacobs and Josephs you're thinking of. They're not the Old Testament guys. These are people after that. But Joseph was the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, that is, the Messiah. Now here's the crazy thing that we can sometimes miss. In this list is a list of sort of biblical characters, people of fame, people of infamy, people with mixed stories. And even in the midst of all those mixed stories, this would have shocked the average Jewish person in the first century. Because while they would have known a lot of these names, the list that was there, in fact, 4 specific names would have jumped out at them as really stand out, and they were the list of 4 women's names because women didn't matter back then. You traced your genealogy through your father. That's why you see the so-and-so, the father begat so-and-so. But 4 times they mention women in this. And there's a reason he mentions these 4 women, and it's not so that everybody would know how wonderful of a story this was. In fact, of these 4 women, 3 of them weren't even Jewish. They were of another race, and so that wasn't supposed to happen in a clean, pure Jewish line. But it happens. But there's even more to this as we look at these stories. We're going to look at these 4 women real quickly today. First one is Tamar. And let me give you a little backstory on Tamar. She was Canaanite, which was a Gentile for the Jews. Again, somebody they weren't supposed to get married to because it sort of messed up the whole racial thing. And if you've been paying attention to the news, race is always a thing, right? There she's this Canaanite, and she is widowed twice to 2 brothers. Story goes, her father-in-law, the guy who ends up being his father-in-law, comes to this country. He marries a Canaanite woman. He has 2 kids. One of his kids, the oldest son, marries Tamar. And something happens. The Bible just simply tells him that this guy was not a good guy, and God actually kills him. So in the Jewish system, that if the one brother dies and the next brother is single, any other brothers, you're supposed to marry them so to help the line continue. So the second brother marries Tamar. But he also dies, and he dies for a whole other reason. I'll let you go home and read that one because I do want to keep it within the PG-13 area, right? Genesis 38, all right? Go home and read it, all right? So, second boy dies. Now, the father-in-law, Judah has a third son who's still much younger, and he tells Tamar, listen, he's too young to get married right now. Go home and hang out with your dad for a while. When he's old enough, I'm going to let you get married to him. But when the boy gets old enough, his father does not let him get married to her, and there's a reason for that. If you had 3 sons, and the first son and the second son married the same woman, and they both died, do you marry your third son to them? Which puts her in a tough spot because now she is without husband, without any offspring, without any, the men were the breadwinners. The women just simply were sort of there. And so she's in big, big trouble here. She's twice widowed, and what does she do? Her father-in-law is Judah. And again, he holds back on this. He comes to a place in his life where his wife has passed away, and he's going to this place, and as she hears he's going to this place, she decides to do something. She decides to pretend to be a prostitute. By the way, if you're listening to this story, this is not one of those stories that says, this is what you ought to do in the Bible. This is not one of those stories, all right? Just telling us what happened. You thought your family was messed up, right? Here we go. So she's not a prostitute, but she just goes to pretend to be a prostitute, and she does it for a specific reason. She knows her father-in-law is going to this place. He's just lost his wife, and so he's in mourning, and he's probably looking for some comfort. And she's without any offspring, any child. So she goes and pretends to be a prostitute. She hangs out. He comes by. She goes, hey, baby. He goes, hey there. How you doing? And, gets the whole story. He's sad. His wife's died. You need some comfort, sure. They make a deal, arrangement. They do the thing. She gets some collateral from him to just kind of hold back so that, hey, I got something. Because she has not been, this is not a line of work she's intending to go into. She's just done it for a reason. 3 months later, lo and behold, she starts to show the little baby bump. Everybody again begins to talk. The father-in-law hears that she has gotten pregnant. What kind of woman goes and gets pregnant on my 2 boys that have died, right? She was supposed to be married to my third son. I didn't marry. I'm glad I didn't. Because she's out playing the prostitute. She's a loose woman. To which they drag her out. They're going to burn her. Literally, they're going to burn her at the stake. This is crazy. She says, that's fine. By the way, take this. She tells her father, take this to the guy who's the father of the child, and he'll explain things. And lo and behold, when he sees this stuff, he recognizes who the father is. It's him. To which he has this great line. She was more righteous than me. Which I guess when you're putting bars of how righteous somebody is, that's a pretty low bar when you look at these stories of what happened here. Matthew includes Tamar in this whole story as part of Jesus' genealogy. And he didn't have to. He could have just stuck with the father. People would have known the story, but didn't have to put it out there. There's another woman comes along. Rahab. Now, Rahab is also a Canaanite. Again, a foreign lady. She's actually living in Jericho, and she has a business she runs there. She has an inn. She has a bed. She has a product. And it works for her. Along come a couple of Jewish spies who've come to Jericho to try to figure out what's the way they can get in here, break down this building, tear it up, attack it, because they were supposed to take over this country. And so she has this discussion with them, and she's probably her biggest known other thing is that deception is her thing. She tells them, great, you go hide in the top roof, I'm going to cover you up. When the soldiers from Jericho come looking for these spies who they know are there, she says, they left, they went that way. They really went that way, but they went that way. And the whole story goes that she ended up through her deceit and her lying saves the Jewish spies who are able to get back, tell the story, and Jericho falls to them. And it's this great, great story of a prostitute who lied, and she makes the Bible cut. And she's also the mother of Boaz, who plays a part because the very next person in Matthew's genealogy is a lady named Ruth, who ends up marrying Boaz, the son of Rahab. Now, Ruth is a whole other story. She's a Moabite. And what you ought to know about a Moabite is Moabites was one of the two nations that came from a guy named Lot. Remember the Bible story? Remember Lot's wife didn't have a great day? Right? Story says she turns around, she turns this pillar of salt, kind of this crazy thing. If you're not a Christian, not a believer, it's kind of like, well, that's kind of a weird story, but I'm just telling you what it says. Wife's dead. He's there. He's got these two daughters. The daughters decide, hey, this has gone bad for them. They're out now living out in the hills. There's no single guys. They want to carry along the family line, and so they get their father-in-law drunk on two successive nights. And one night, one sleeps with him. Next night, they get him drunk. The other one sleeps with him. They both become pregnant. Lo and behold, that's how we get the Moabites. That's why you shouldn't mess around with looking back in your genealogy sometime. Just leave it alone, Just know who your father and your grandparents, maybe your great-grandparents, and just sometimes be comfortable with that. But, this is the whole thing. This is where they come from. They come from this bad incestual start, right? So she's a Moabite, and she ends up being a widow. She marries this part Jewish guy, this Jewish guy. She marries this Jewish guy. He ends up dying. She has a sister-in-law who's also married the brother of this Jewish guy. He's also died. Their mother-in-law is there, and the mother-in-law's like, my boys are dead. I'm in a foreign country. I'm going home. Maybe I can find some way to make life work by going home. One of the daughter-in-law says, okay, nice knowing you. Sorry. Have a great trip. I'm going to go back to my family. The other one, Ruth, says, no. I have fallen in love with my mother-in-law. Just let that statement sink for a second, all right? I've fallen in love with you as my mother-in-law, and so I'm not leaving your side. Wherever you go, I'm going to go. I'm part of this family. You've made me feel as part of this family, and even though I'm not Jewish, I'm going with you. So she goes back. She goes to where they're from. She's this great devoted daughter-in-law. Great romantic story. You can find in Ruth if you like romantic stories, because it's the story of how she ends up, meeting this guy named Boaz. They fall in love, how he takes care of her, how this all kind of works out. Gives you some insight into Jewish history. But there's one final woman, and that's this. Her name is Bathsheba, which is fitting because the story begins with her in a bath. So Bathsheba is a great story. She's the only Jewish one of these four women. She's the wife of a soldier, a devout soldier who's out fighting. And the story goes that it's springtime, and that's when kings go out to begin wars because you don't want to do it in winter. You go out and fight these battles. David's sitting at home, and he sends his army out, but he decides to hang out and not go out with the army. One night as he's hanging around, he looks off, he's looking around the city from his top of his castle, and he goes, whoa, who is that? Sees this woman over there. She's bathing at night. Probably seems like a safe time to bathe on a roof because who should be out at night looking around the roof, right? But apparently King David kind of fits that whole model. And so he says, hey, gets one of his guys. Hey, who's this? Oh, that's Bathsheba, the wife of one of your soldiers. So, hey, invite her to come over. She comes over. She's one of those #MeToos now because how do you say no to a king, right? And not to downplay that. I mean, this is part of the story. This is where she's at. This is a powerful guy. He says, hey, baby. And so they do their thing one night. Apparently a great night, but doesn't go as well, quite as well as David hopes, because Bathsheba ends up getting pregnant. Who would have thought you can only have to do it one time and you can get pregnant? You've probably heard that story before, haven't you? And so David devises the scheme. Let's bring her husband home. We're going to invite her husband home, and maybe as he comes home, he's been out fighting for a while. He'll come home, he'll be kind of, hey, baby, haven't seen you in a while. Hey, honey, great. They'll get together. Maybe I can kind of cover this up. Maybe he's not good with math and figuring out how this works, 9 months. Maybe this will work, but this guy's too good of a soldier. He doesn't go sleep, doesn't come home and go sleep with his wife. He parks himself outside David's castle and sleeps the night there because he wants to protect his king, because he's devoted to his king and what he's doing. Which to David goes, oh man, you're messing up my plans, dude. So he gives the guy a letter to take back to his general. The basic letter is simply this: get in the battle, put this guy at the front of the line, count to 10, and everybody runs except leave him fighting out there fighting. Let him die. That's what happens. So now we have Bathsheba, pregnant from a one-night stand to a powerful guy, and I guess the good thing is David decides he'll make her his wife. Well, not his wife only, one of his multiple wives, because they had a whole bunch of wives back then, but he takes care of her that way. I don't know about you, but I look at the story and I go, wow. I thought I just had my grandmother that was kind of a problem in my family. You got a whole thing here. And the question has to be, why would Matthew include this? Because he didn't have to. Remember, genealogy works through the guys back then. Now in Judaism it works through the mother, but back then it was through the father. And why even bring them up? I think he brings them up because Matthew's genealogy isn't just the beginning of Jesus' story. Because who better to understand your messed up, complicated, convoluted life better than somebody who comes from a family that is all messed up, complicated, convoluted. And while he was 100% God, he was 100% man, and don't ask me to explain how 100 and 100 equals 100. That's just how it works. But the 100% human side wasn't this perfect, untouched, never sinned in my life or my generation before or the generation before. For the whole time, God has protected this one group of people, this line, this pure line that you can follow generations back. No, you go through. This is just the women. You get into the guys. Judah, the guy who sleeps with his daughter-in-law, is also the one who sold his brother Joseph into slavery. Got Abraham, who can't decide if his wife's his wife or his sister. When somebody says, hey, she's kind of cute, she's my sister, And I think the story is in there for this very specific reason. It's not just to give us genealogy, it's to give us that this is not just his story, but it's really our story. See, the reality is we all have labels. Some of us have labels that we've chosen for ourselves. Some are labels we believe about ourselves. Maybe you believe you're hot. Maybe you believe that you used to be hot. Maybe you believe you'll never be hot. Not only have labels that you put on yourself, you have labels that other people have put on you. How many of you, along with me, have nicknames from childhood that you did not pick for yourself? That have stuck to this day, and that's why you don't hang around with those people too much anymore. Anybody else? When you go home, you don't go visit that neighborhood because they're going to call you some name, Tiny or Stinky or whatever, whatever the thing was that happened on just this one occasion. You did something dumb one moment, and that one moment has now stuck with you the rest of your life. Because every time they see you, they remind you of it. Isn't it crazy how labels work that way? You can work a long time to get a good label, and you just do one thing. Maybe just mess up one time, or maybe not a mess up, just misunderstanding, and lo and behold, now you're. But we all have labels. And labels get so easily attached to us. And not only do we have labels, labels are powerful. Labels can keep you from doing certain things, and they can force you into certain ways that you would never have gone. And once you get defined as that kind of person, she's that kind of girl, he's that kind of guy, there's a tendency to go, you know what, if that's what everybody thinks, and our problem is we forget something that if we could somehow get it, literally would change the course of our lives. And if you're under 20 years old, I hope you can get this early, because there are people in this room that would love to have gotten this earlier than you are getting it. And that is that the only person that can label you is the person who made you or the person who owns you. That's why if you look at the back of your shirt or your blouse, it has a tag, and it probably doesn't have your name in that tag. If it does, you probably have a little OTC from being a child, and putting my name on everything, which is how, you own it, you can put your name on it, right? But no other label ought to stick in our lives. But how easy they do, right? Just even the thought of the labels from your childhood. Ones you wanted to forget. The ones you wanted to hope you were past. The ones you don't want to be reminded of. Again, can make us feel worthless and hopeless and bad. That's why they're so powerful. And think about it. You remember something that one of your parents said to you at some point in your life that just is stuck to this day? Maybe it was the thing they always called you. Maybe if you were a girl, it was princess. If you were a boy, that probably wasn't the term you wanted to hear too much. Or maybe it was something you were just called one time. One time they said something, for whatever reason, that particular time stuck. And there's lots of reasons things stick. And I would just remind you that the only way you can unstick something that's stuck to you is to peel it off. And to change how you think about those labels and who's able to put those labels. Because the reality is your label is not an obstacle to grace. It is the point of grace. Nobody comes to Jesus, nobody comes to God with a perfect story. Nobody comes to God with a great genetic makeup. Nobody comes to God without some labels, without some views, without some stuff that you're not embarrassed of or ashamed of. And the great thing about all the people that have written the Bible, not one of them says you have to get your act together first in order to come to God. It's always just come to God. Let him worry about the rest. Come to God and change, allow him to, as your maker and as now your owner, when you recognize that, to now call you, put a new label on you. And for some of us, that label is the idea of forgiveness. And for some of us, forgiveness is the biggest thing, and for some of us, it's not. But the idea that I am forgiven, period. Not forgiven when, not forgiven if, but forgiven. For some of us, it's the word that we're valued. To have a label that says valued on us, when we have not felt valued by anyone or anything. Or even when we have felt valued, it just doesn't feel real because of the labels that still swirl around in our head. For some of us, it's free. Free in the best sense of that word. That I'm not bound by any of those things anymore. Matthew, just a few verses later, will say this. That she, talking about Mary, that she will have a son, and they will name him this, Emmanuel, which means God is with us. The reason Jesus has a messed up, screwed up, complicated genealogy is all of us have a messed up, screwed up, complicated genealogy. And for him to be able to save us, he has to be one of us. Now, he doesn't sin through that. None of these labels that other people tried to stick to him, and he had lots of labels that were thrown at him. Talk about the question of who's your daddy. Some of you, have never grown up with a dad. Jesus understood that kind of weight of what that means. Who's your daddy? Because they had this whole weird story about how this all took place. And the reality is, his story is your story. Because he understands what it's like to have a meal together and have all these complications going on. All the demands and all the expectations. And here's the bottom line thing I want you to take away as you leave today, and simply this. That my life is not so messed up. It's not so messed up that God can't make something of it. And maybe the thing you need to do today is to accept the label that your maker has put on you. And try to figure out how you can make that label stick as you try to pull these other labels off. My experience has been this is not a one-time event. This is a process. And every time you think you got them all off and everything's looking good, lo and behold, you find another label. Now, sometimes it's like right here on your shirt. You ever get one of those that just sort of irritates you at the right angle, And it just bothers you, and you got to get it off. I just want you to say this out loud with me. My life is not so messed up that God can't make something of it. I hope you'll believe that. Because it's true. In fact, it's so true that as you go back and look at these four ladies, some of them, their stories turn into stories of faith, of ones that people say, look at them. Rahab, messed up, prostitute, willing to lie to save some other people she doesn't know, but also to save herself in that whole thing, if you want to take the cynical approach. God made something out of her. The reality that this is not about being right all the time and perfect all the time and pure all the time. This is about we respond to God in those moments that we get. And that's what she's remembered for. Responding in the moment that she got. And I hope today, in this moment, you'll respond as well. So with that said, I invite you to bow our heads as we wrap this up. And if this whole my life is not so messed up that God can't make something out of it is something that you just need to grasp onto today, I just invite you to pray along with me now. And if you want to shake your head yes or to raise your hand. Father, you know the labels that have stuck to my life. And you know the labels that you want to attach to my life. You know the places where I have messed up. The places where I have screwed up. The things that I am ashamed of and heartbroken over. But I am thankful that who I am and where I've come from and all the people from my past who have made me up who I am today, that none of those are a deterrent or an obstacle to your love, your acceptance, your forgiveness, and your value of me. And I just ask you to help me figure out a way to live your labels out in a much better way, in a way that sticks. It sticks not only for me, but in the ways I label, think about, and talk with others. And I pray that in my complicated life, in this complicated month, that I won't let all the busyness and all the complications and all the messiness let me miss you in and through it all, because you are with us. And I thank you for that. Amen.